Alhamdulillahi wahda, salatu wassalamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da, amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the third session of preparing for Ramadan. As we are rushing towards the beginning of the month, we've just got another session. So we've got this session and another session. And inshallah, I do hope that I have covered lots of topics. And I hope that we will be able to really make the best of the beginning of this month. So today I will begin with the Hadith of Jibrāʿīl. Now, this is a hadith which is mentioned in many of the collections, and it is often repeated, and it is in the Sihah Sitta. So as I mentioned in one of my previous lessons, that Sihah Sitta are the 6 most authentic collections of hadith. So this is known as the Hadith of Jibrāʿīl, and it is a very comprehensive hadith which explains to us the entire concept of our religion within a nutshell. So within a very short sort of narration, which is also very impactful. So the companions narrate that a man came into the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ, and he was very white of clothing and very dark in terms of his hair. Now, this was something very strange for them, because one can imagine that 1400 years ago, travel was not as easy and as convenient as it is today. So obviously, if a stranger walked into Masjid Nabawi, the companions knew that he is a traveler, most likely, right? And there were no signs of travel on this traveler, because if he had traveled, then his clothes would not have been in the whitest of condition, and his hair would not have been, so black. It would have been covered with dust. And he came and he sat very close to the Prophet ﷺ, so much so it is mentioned in the narration that he sat knee to knee. So now in Arabic culture, this was something, also very strange, because only your nearest kin and your nearest tribesmen would be able to sit so close to you that their legs would be touching yours. So the companions were very shocked and in awe that who is this person who is apparently a man, and he is a traveler, because they have never seen him before in Medina Munawwara, coming to the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ and sitting so close to him. And then the man proceeded to ask, what is Islam? And then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that Islam is to believe in Allah, so the proclamation of the Shahada, so to believe that Allah is one, and to believe that Muhammad ﷺ is the final messenger, to establish the prayer, so that is 5 prayers in a day, to fast in the month of Ramadan, to give charity, and to perform the pilgrimage once in a lifetime. The man then he didn't just proceed to ask the next question, but he affirmed, and he said, "You have spoken the truth." So this this amazed the companions, that it was against the etiquette of asking questions to the Prophet ﷺ, because if the companions asked, they would ask in a state of awe or in a state of curiosity. And once the Prophet ﷺ would give the answer, they would accept it and be silent, or they would, question him further and ask further questions. But here is a stranger, a traveler, who is asking a question, receiving the answer, and then affirming it and saying, "You have spoken the truth." And then he went on to ask that what is Iman, so what is faith? And the Prophet answered him and said, it is to believe in Allah, to believe in the messengers, to believe in the angels, to believe in the books that have been sent down, to believe in the day of judgment, and to believe in qadar. Qadar means predestination, the good of it, and the evil in it, right? So these are known as the 6 pillars of the faith of Islam, or the 6 pillars of Iman. The man then went on to say, "You have spoken the truth." So again, he affirmed that the Prophet ﷺ has, explained the pillars of both Islam and of Iman in a nutshell, right? And then he went on to ask, what is ihsan? And the Prophet ﷺ replied and said, it is to worship Allah as if you see him. And if you do not see him, then know that he sees you. And to this, the angel replied and said, you have spoken the truth. And then he went on to ask, what are the signs of the day of judgment? And the Prophet ﷺ said that it is when the slave girl will give birth to the master, and when those who are naked and without shoes will go on to build the tallest of buildings. So in a nutshell, this is known as the Ḥadīth of Jibrāʿīl, and this is a hadith that if anybody were to ask, whether they believe in Islam or whether they do not believe in it or whether they're not informed of it, this is the hadith to basically tell them that this is what our faith is about, and this is what our religion is about. So from this hadith, for today's lesson, I'll be taking the lesson of ihsan to implement how we can use ihsan to prepare for the month of Ramadan. So ihsan, literally means excellence. It can also mean to beautify something. It can also mean to purify something, right? And as I mentioned previously as well, that Ramadan or tarmeed, Ramadan is a word that comes from tarmeed, which is, to sharpen the soul, to purify the heart, and to receive the blessing of taqwa in this month. So ihsan also means purity and purification. And what we will be purifying in the month of Ramadan is our spiritual heart, right? And the way to do that is to curb the carnal desires through fasting. So to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you see him. This is a very special spiritual state that a person becomes so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through worshiping him and through being aware of one's own actions and one's own words, so much so that a person becomes so beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they don't physically obviously see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that will only happen in Jannah, when we will lay our eyes upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they see the reasoning behind all the good that they do. They see the reasoning behind all of the evil that they may stay away from, or that they have to strive to stay away from. And also, they see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hand is guiding them in every situation in life. So whether that is a good situation or it is a difficult situation. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, that a mu'min, everything for her or him is khair, right? If he or she is in a state of plenitude and things are going great, then he or she will practice shukr, be grateful for the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the circumstances in life are difficult, then he or she will practice sabr, right? So this is why Prophet said that in every situation in life, in every circumstance of life, a true mu'min, meaning a believer who values her iman or values her faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, she or he will see that every circumstance in my life is, it is good for me and I thank Allah, or I'm going through a patch in life which is difficult for me and I do sabr, right? So this brings me to the topic of when we approach the month of Ramadan, as I mentioned, with a positive mindset, and we also approach it with this thought that, all my circumstances are in the hands of Allah, then of course there will be many people who will be entering this month and they may not be able to fast. They may be ill. They may be, there may be mothers who are perhaps about to give birth, or because of the difficulties of pregnancy, they would not be able to fast. There may be many who have conditions and they have illnesses that, if they were to fast, then that would endanger them. So even for such people who are unable to fast, even they can approach this month with a really positive mindset. And that is that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put me in this situation. I have not come here of my own accord, right? This was a trial or a test or a tribulation that was written for me. But that doesn't mean that I cannot reap the immense rewards of this month. So as I mentioned before, to set targets accordingly, right? So that's fine if you're not able to fast. Then, because of your medical situation, then, try to make the most of the month by reading the Qur'an, or at least reading as much as you can, right? And doing dhikr and, making dua. I will be going through some of the narrations, right, that mention the virtues of this month. And even so for those who may not be able to fast, right? So going back to the point about ihsan, that if we're unable to see, let's say our faith hasn't developed to such an extent that we're unable to see the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything, then the Prophet goes on to say, وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ تَرَاهُ. So if you do not see Allah, worship him as if he sees you. فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ, right? That Allah is ever watchful over you, right? So if a person isn't able to bring themselves, up to a spiritual point where they can see the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in circumstance in their life, then at least spend your life in a way, and spend Ramadan in a way that you're aware that Allah is watching you, right? And this is something I mentioned, this concept of basira, which is mentioned in the Qur'an, that on the Day of Judgment, a person's basira will become so sharp that they will be able to see what is happening in the spiritual realm, which is something that they could not see in the physical realm, right, when they were alive in this world. But Ramadan gives that glimpse. It gives you a glimpse of that spiritual realm. And the way it does so is that Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that when it is the first night of Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up the doors of heaven, of Jannah, and He closes the doors of Jahannam, right? And the way that this manifests in our world physically and spiritually is that it becomes easier to do good deeds, right? And this is something everybody will notice about the month of Ramadan, that it's easier to do the good, and it is easier also to stay away from the evil, right? And this is the effect that the doors of Jannah being open and the doors of Jahannam being closed has on this world. Because ultimately, what is the effect of Jannah and Jahannam on our lives? The effect is that everybody is walking upon a path that is either leading them towards Jannah, or they're walking upon a path that is leading them towards Jahannam, right? And by closing the door of Jahannam in the month of Ramadan, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it more difficult for you to perform those evil deeds. So then naturally a person's heart inclines towards doing the good deeds, right? And going upon that path which leads them towards Jannah, right? And the same narration goes on to say that all of the devils are locked. And in other variations, it says, Maradatu shayateen are locked, okay? Maradatu shayateen means the big devils. So there are certain types of, shayateen. Shayateen is like the plural of shaitan, which means, those devils, or like those jinns, right, that have followed the path of shaitan. So basically they are helping shaitan in his mission to lead human beings astray, right? So the big ones are the ones that convince human beings to do the major sins, right? And the major sins are the kaba'ir in Arabic, which include, for example, fornication, the drinking of alcohol, murder, and these major sins which require that a person has to repent from them in order for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive, right? So these major sins, these are basically the job of these maradatu shayateen, or the big devils, right? That convince human beings through their whisperings to do these deeds, right? So scholars differ about this. Some of them say that in the month of Ramadan, every single shaitan is locked. So, every devil who whispers, whether you do a big major sin or whether you do, a minor sin, all of them are locked, right? This is one opinion of the scholars of Hadith. Another opinion of the scholars of Hadith is that only the major shayateen are locked. So this means that, person still is falling prey to small temptations, or still committing the minor sins, right? But in any case, right, the point is that in the month of Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easier for us to do good, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it easier for us to stay away from bad works, right? And we notice this and we see it, that, everyone says, oh, it's the month of Ramadan, I think I need to stop doing this haram action. Some people say, I'll just resume it on the day of Eid. But obviously that's quite, that's hypocritical, and that's not the way to have a positive mindset about Ramadan, right? Once we give up a sin, we don't think about doing it on Eid. We think about like removing it from our life for good, because the purpose of Ramadan is to attain taqwa, right? And taqwa means to have that God consciousness in all of our actions and in all of our intentions as well. So another thing which, from the spiritual realm that we may not perceive is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he mentions, لَخَلُوفُ فَمِ الصَّائِمِ أَطْيَبُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ مِنْ رِيحِ الْمِسْكِ. لَخَلُوفُ فَمِ الصَّائِمِ means the the odor or, the foul smell that comes out of famus sa'imi, of the mouth of a fasting person, atyabu indallahi, is more beloved to Allah than the smell of misk. So misk is literally musk, right? Musk is a very opulent kind of perfume that was used at the time of Prophet ﷺ. It was a very expensive perfume. Even today, musk is a very expensive perfume. And the smell of musk is so overpowering and it is so strong that anybody who just gets a whiff of musk, they immediately notice of the beauty of that smell. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying that the smell that comes out of your mouth at the time that you fast, now physically around you, right? If people notice that, okay, if you haven't eaten for a long time, right? This is despite like brushing your teeth, because it is permissible to brush your teeth while you are fasting, given that, the toothpaste doesn't go down your throat, right? Because that would nullify your fast. So to carefully brush your teeth, but then even so after brushing, while, so many hours have elapsed in the day of a fasting person, an odor does build up, right? Because if you haven't eaten, then there's a foul smell that comes out of your mouth. Now, physically speaking, right, when somebody smells that, it is, of course, repulsive. But the Prophet ﷺ is saying in the spiritual realm, right, so when the angels are writing down your deeds, just this act of fasting and that smell that is producing, it is more beloved to Allah than the smell of musk, right? So in the spiritual realm, it is seen as a very beautiful scent that is emanating out of the mouth of a fasting person. So subhanAllah, that is a very beautiful thing to ponder upon. Even in our lives as Muslims, that things are not as they seem, right? Sometimes we might see in our physical life that those who are committing oppression and those who are committing wrong seem to be rewarded for it, right? And those who try to act on the path of righteousness, they don't really seem to be getting a reward in this life or an immediate sort of recompense for it, right? So this shows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His angels are ever watchful over us. And all of the deeds that we do for His sake, Allah is aware of them, right? And Allah is valuing them, and He's constantly valuing them. So this is one way to think about, to worship Allah as if you see Him, and if not, then He sees you. Okay. So this hadith, it points out to us that the fasting of Ramadan is so beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that even another narration, it says that when a person fasts, then all of creation makes dua for him or her, right? And even the fish within the sea, they make dua for a fasting person. And subhanAllah, this is a really beautiful thing to experience, because when you are fasting, it literally feels as if there is a shield over you, and that shield is the prayers of all of creation that are around you, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is enabling the spiritual realm to be so full of prayer and so full of radiance and spiritual enlightenment. A fasting person can pretty much perceive it during their fast. Right. I would like to now mention a little bit about the way that the Prophet ﷺ would observe the suhoor, which is the early morning meal, and how he would observe the iftar, so which is the evening meal, in which we break our fast. So it is best, it is mustahab, that a person eat the suhoor early in the morning, just before the time of Fajr, right? In order to be a little bit precautious, it is best that we look at the time of Fajr and try to sort of stop eating about 2 to 3 minutes, just to remain on the side of precaution right before the time of Fajr comes in, right? The Prophet ﷺ has narrated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, so this is a hadith Qudsi, that ahabbu ibadi ilayya a'jaluhum fataran. The most beloved of my servants to me, a'jalahum, is the one who is quickest, fataran, in doing their iftar. So the act of breaking your fast, right, it needs to be a very mindful act. Like alhamdulillah, looking at the time of Maghrib, it comes in at a time where we are normally having our dinner anyway, right? So we've got that time and that space to really sit down and be mindful of the way we are breaking our fast. So the Prophet is saying that Allah is saying that He really loves the act of quickening the breaking of the fast, right? Now, why is this? How could one think that, okay, this is an act of worship that I'm doing. Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to quickly end the act of worship, right? So rationally, perhaps it may not make much sense. But the reason for it, it is explained in another narration that the Prophet ﷺ has said there are two happinesses for the person who does the iftar or breaks her fast. One is that he or she is happy to be eating, right? And the second is that he or she is happy to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the iftar is like an act that kind of metaphorically represents our lives, right? Because the fast is a struggle, it is difficult, and there are many struggles and difficulties in our life. But the end of it is always sweet for a person who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And this is why when the Prophet ﷺ would break the fast, he would make a prayer from his heart, right? That he would be so grateful for that sip of water. He would be so grateful for that bite of food that it would remind him of the difficulties of the Day of Judgment, right? Everybody will be thirsty and everybody will be worried for their deeds. And then, eventually when they see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He forgives them and He accepts their ibadah, then all of their thirst, their stress and their anxiety, all of it will subside, right? So the fast is metaphorically like that. It reminds us of the Day of Judgment, because when we experience the thirst and we experience the hunger and we experience the tiredness of fasting, then it reminds us of the trials of the Day of Judgment. And those trials will end once a person meets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So similarly, the difficulty of fasting, the hunger, the thirst, and the tiredness, that ends with that sip of water, and that ends with the first bite of the date. So this act of relief is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it shows that Allah loves us so much so that He even loves the way we break our fast, right? And He loves to meet us, right? As we need to love to meet Him, right? Which is why the process of purification is so important. So the Prophet ﷺ would break his fast with dates. And it comes in a narration that he mentions, if any of you has to break their fast, then he should do so with a date, because innahu barakatun. So the date, the tamar, is a source of barakah or a source of blessing. If someone cannot find a date, then break it with water, fa innahu tahurun. Now, obviously, Islam came for every kind of socioeconomic class, and the Prophet always made sure to cater to the rich and to the poor as well. So he mentioned that the most blessed way for a person to break their fast is to break it with a date, because dates are a source of blessing. Now, we know now, right, 1400 years later, that dates are very scientifically, nutritiously very healthy, right? So the dates have got all of the calories, the iron, the right amount of sugar that will help to replenish the body after a day of exhaustive fasting, right? And it's very beneficial to begin your iftar with a date, because all of the nutrients that the body was craving throughout the day, all of that becomes fulfilled by eating dates, right? But of course, now at the time of Prophet ﷺ, there would have been people who would not be able to afford dates, right? So they were of a lower socioeconomic class. And the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that if you have not got dates, then drink water, and innahu tahurun. It is a means of purification. So this is also scientifically known today, that water is a great purifier, right? So all of the toxins that build up inside of our body, they all get washed away and they all get released by drinking that water at the time of iftar. So both of these things are the masnoon way of breaking our fast. So obviously, we've got like our special dishes culturally that we prepare for the month of Ramadan, and we carry on to eat those after breaking our fast with dates and with water. So another hadith goes on to mention that that the Prophet would make two different du'as at the time of iftar, right? The first one that he would make is he would say, ذهب الظمأ وابتلت العروق وثبت الأجر إن شاء الله. So ذهب الظمأ, the thirst is gone. وابتلت العروق, and the veins have become quenched, so the blood vessels have become quenched. وثبت الأجر إن شاء الله, and the reward from Allah has become, thabata means it has become confirmed. So, it is a surety from the Prophet ﷺ that Allah has now rewarded you when you have broken your fast. This is one narration to the companions mentioned that this is something the Prophet ﷺ would say while he would break his fast in the month of Ramadan. And it shows a very human element of the Prophet ﷺ, that he's expressing gratefulness and gratitude at a really human level. So if we haven't eaten and had anything to drink in a long day, this is also how we express ourselves. We say, oh, thank God for that drink. It was so refreshing. I feel refreshed. I feel quenched. I feel as if I was parched and now my thirst is gone, right? So this narration, which Prophet he would say, it was literally coming from his heart, that he felt as if his blood vessels were quenched and that his thirst had now gone. And then he correlates this physical aspect to the spiritual realm that I mentioned. And he says, ثَبَتَ الْأَجْرُ inshallah, that now the reward has become certain, right? That for us, we only think of our present time. So we think of right now, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, and my body needs this, and I'm responding to my body's needs, right? And spiritually, the angels, they're recording it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, recording it as well, that your reward has now become written for you, right? Another dua that he would make is, which I also mentioned in a previous lesson, was Allahumma inni laka sumtu wa alayka tawakkaltu wa ala rizqika aftartu. Oh Allah, I have fasted for you, and I have had tawakkul upon you, right? So fasting also teaches us tawakkul. Tawakkul means, it comes from wakala, which is to leave your affairs in the hands of someone else. So for example, in modern day Arabic, a wakil is somebody who represents you on your behalf and fights your battles for you on your behalf, right? A lawyer. So a wakil is literally a lawyer. It's taken from the same root letters of tawakkul, which is wakala. That when you leave your affairs, in someone else's hands, then it removes the anxiety and the stress of having to deal with it. So if a believer has tawakkul, they do everything, that's physically possible for them to resolve their matters, or if there are problems, to solve those problems. And then once they have made the efforts, they leave the results to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So we know when we fast that the time of iftar will come and the time of relief will come, right? So similarly, we know in our difficulties, in our circumstances, that the relief will come. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will handle our affairs no matter how difficult those affairs seem to us. So that is what tawakkul is, right? So the Prophet, he reaffirms his tawakkul at the time of iftar. And then he goes on to say, وَعَلَى رِزْقِكَ أَفْطَرْتُ, and upon your provision, I have broken my fast. So sometimes at the beginning of the day, we don't even know what our iftar meal will be. Sometimes perhaps some of you may be breaking fast in a community event and you have no idea of what you will be served, right? So that risk, that provision was already written for you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he made sure that it was brought to you at the time of your breaking of fast, right? So this again reaffirms and it reconfirms that if a person has tawakkul, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides that risk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides that provision for them to come out of whatever difficulty or circumstances that they're going through. The last narration that I would like to mention is that when the Prophet ﷺ would eat the suhoor, so when he would eat the meal before the time of Fajr came in, once a companion was passing by, and his name was Arbaz ibn Surata, right? Arbaz ibn Surata radiallahu anhu, he was passing by the home of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ invited him in, and he said to him, Ni'ma suhuru lil mu'mini, that the suhoor is a very good meal for a mu'min, right? The suhoor meaning the pre-dawn meal. So something that we eat before the time of Fajr comes in is known as suhoor, is a very good meal, and it is a source of barakah for the mu'min, right? Now, how can suhoor be a source of barakah? You know, a couple years ago, I remember that there was, when Ramadan used to come in the really hot months, right? And the fasts were really, really long in the UK. A lot of youngsters, you know, they had this concern because they'd be sitting their GCSEs or their A levels, and they would say that, you know, our brain won't function and it'll be too difficult, and we wouldn't be able to perform really well in our exams. So at that time, you know, one of the scholars, he mentioned and he said, if you really have strong faith, right, that the suhoor is a meal that will get you through it, right? So again, that positive mindset, then, you know, perhaps fasting will be of benefit to you in your state of sitting your examinations, right? So the way the Prophet would teach is that he would make you believe, right, that this is what is going to get you through. And this is the power of the mind as well. As I mentioned before, that intentions would really make a person's life turn around, right? So if a person were to partake in the suhoor meal and, you know, make sure that they've covered all their nutrients for the day, then they can have that tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that this will get me through the day, right? And it's even known from, you know, earlier like theologians and stuff, who not necessarily the Muslims, but even, you know, like Greek theologians. So when they would have to undergo some kind of really strong intellectual exercise of writing, they would fast. So they would fast for long periods of time, because removing the toxins of their body would clear their mind, and it would cause their, you know, their intellectual prowess to be much stronger. So this is what the Prophet was teaching, that if you eat the suhoor, then that is really good for you, because having tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that meal will replenish you and it will take you through your fasting, that is really all you need spiritually to get you through those difficult physical circumstances. So I will stop here, and if anybody has questions, they can type. So there was one question from the last session, which is that if a woman is menstruating, then is she able to read the Qur'an? So the answer to that was that no, she cannot recite the Qur'an if she's in a state of menstruation. However, she can listen to it. So if someone would like to do a khatam in the month of Ramadan, it's best to read more of your ajza, more juz of the Qur'an in the first few days, and, you know, so sort of cover the days that you'll be missing in the middle, if that is a time when you're due to, you know, menstruate. Otherwise, you could time it in such a way that you read extra whenever the time comes when you're not reading, so that covers up for that time as well. So any questions, you can type them in the chat box. Okay, so if there are no questions, then we will break for Maghrib. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاك الله خير.